It's often been remarked that the exceptions to the hearsay rule all but completely bury the basic prohibition against the admission of hearsay evidence. In addition to specific enumerated types of hearsay, there's a residual exception that, at first glance, appears to allow in almost any other hearsay. But does it? The court considered the residual hearsay exception in State v. Weaver. Tessia Mathes hired Mary Weaver to babysit Tessia's 11-month-old daughter, Melissa. About an hour into her shift, Weaver called 911 to report that Melissa wasn't breathing. Melissa died of respiratory arrest the next day. Melissa's autopsy revealed recent injuries and older injuries, including a skull fracture, bleeding in the brain, and retinal hemorrhages, all consistent with shaken baby syndrome. Based on medical testimony that the recent injuries caused her death, Weaver was charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment. During a bench trial, Melissa's mother testified that shortly before Weaver arrived, Melissa fell off her Cookie Monster child chair but hadn't suffered any significant injuries. After the trial, the district court convicted Weaver of both charges, and the Court of Appeals affirmed. Weaver filed a motion for a new trial, asserting that 3 new witnesses had come forward. At a hearing on Weaver's motion, all 3 witnesses testified that a few weeks after Melissa's death, they'd met at the restaurant where Tessia worked. There, Tessia stated that while she was dressing Melissa that morning, Melissa had hit her head on a coffee table, knocking her briefly unconscious. 2 doctors then testified, one of whom had testified at the original trial. Both doctors testified that the fall from the Cookie Monster chair, coupled with the newly discovered trauma, could have caused Melissa's respiratory distress and death. They also testified that Melissa's injuries were consistent with the incident described by the new witnesses. The prosecution objected to the new witnesses' testimony as hearsay. The trial court overruled the objection, allowed the witnesses to testify, then granted Weaver's motion for a new trial. The prosecution appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court.